Welcome to the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as NEPA, introductory course titled Project Development Process, provided by the Florida Department of Transportation's Office of Environmental Management. This training is part of a series of introductory courses that provide guidance on FDOT's process for complying with NEPA, called Project Development and Environment, or PD&E. Please see the Environmental Management Academy course catalog in the FDOT Learning Curve or the Office of Environmental Management website, PD&E Training Track, for other computer-based trainings in this series. Several of these trainings are referenced throughout this CBT. A link to the site can be found at the end of the CBT on the resources page. The purpose of this course is to provide an overview of the project development process as described in Part 1, Chapter 4 of the PD&E Manual. Please note that you may pause this training at any time. This training will have 8 lessons. Lesson 1 will provide the basics of the project development process. Guidance on the project development process is provided in Part 1, Chapter 4 of the PD&E Manual. You may want to have this chapter handy as you go through this training. This chapter is available on FDOT's Office of Environmental Management website using this link. This link also connects you to other chapters of the PD&E Manual that are referenced throughout this training. The project development and delivery process begins with planning studies and ends with a constructed project. The FDOT project development process is comprehensive, involving planning, project development and environment, or PD&E, design, right-of-way, and construction phases. It is important to understand the sequence and interrelation between these phases to successfully deliver a project. PD&E is the FDOT process for evaluating transportation project impacts and complying with NEPA and applicable laws and regulations for federal projects and other regulations for state-funded projects. Communication among various offices involved in the project development process and transition of the project from one phase to another is critical to a project's success. Project managers are responsible for establishing and maintaining communication and coordination throughout the project development and delivery process. This figure shows the project development and delivery process along with the building blocks of each phase and how the phases connect with the PD&E process. These phases are supported through various activities and processes. The efficient transportation decision-making, or ETDM screening, is completed during the planning phase of a project. Planning and environmental linkage is established in the planning and PD&E phases of the project. The project development and delivery process supports the FDOT statewide acceleration transformation, or SWAT process. The initial evaluation of all projects uses the SWAT process so that appropriate state and federal funding decisions are made. SWAT streamlines project development by following a structured process to develop project scopes and schedules, reducing duplicative work, performing initial data collection and analysis ahead of the PD&E study, and performing design activities concurrent with PD&E when possible, or overlapping the design phase and PD&E study to the maximum extent possible. The districts have flexibilities to adapt the SWAT process within their existing project selection and programming processes. Public outreach and interagency coordination is ongoing throughout the life of a project. The project begins with the identification of a transportation need or deficiencies through a planning process that prioritizes short and long-range transportation improvements. For qualifying projects, FDOT uses the ETDM screening tool, or EST, to gather project information from regulatory agencies, public and other project stakeholders about projects' potential effects on social, cultural, natural, and physical resources. During the PD&E phase, FDOT performs alternative analysis, conducts environmental studies, prepares various technical studies, and completes the environmental document, which is necessary to obtain the project's location and design concept acceptance, or LDCA. The PD&E phase identifies and addresses environmental issues, if any, on a project. FDOT projects that are Type 1 categorical exclusions or non-major state actions do not have a PD&E phase. Environmental evaluations for Type 1 CEs and non-major state actions are performed and approved by the District Environmental Office during the design phase. Information obtained during the PD&E phase is used to develop the scope of work for the design phase. The scope of the design phase also depends on the delivery method chosen for a project. For conventional design projects, the design phase typically includes preparation of final construction plans, specifications, and final estimates. However, for projects that use alternative contracting methods, the design phase does not include final construction plans. Typically, acquisition of right-of-way occurs concurrent or just after the design phase, before a project moves into construction. The scope of the design phase depends on the project delivery method. Environmental reevaluations are performed during this phase. Guidance on the design phase is provided in FDOT's Design Manual for on-system projects and the Florida Green Book for off-system projects. A link to these sources can be found on the resources page of this CBT. To deliver transportation projects, FDOT uses a variety of project delivery methods, which range from conventional methods, which are also known as design, bid, build, to alternative contracting methods such as design, build, and public-private partnership concessionaire agreements. The choice of delivery method depends on a variety of factors such as context of the project, status of the project schedule, risk factors, funding availability, level of complexity, and other project-specific factors. Public involvement, which provides opportunity for input from interested and affected members of the public, local governments, and environmental, regulatory, and resource agencies, is required in all phases of a transportation project. The public involvement effort should be scaled to match the magnitude or complexity of the project, including potential project issues and challenges of a project, such as potential controversy, right-of-way acquisition, relocations, and access modifications. FDOT's Public Involvement Handbook for guidance on developing and implementing effective public involvement for transportation. A link to the handbook can be found on the resources page. During the planning phase, the ETDM process includes public involvement with stakeholders and resource agencies. During PD&E, a public involvement plan is created and implemented which guides the public involvement and interagency coordination of the project. The procedures for public involvement during PD&E of a transportation project is outlined in Part 1, Chapter 11 of the PD&E Manual. Public involvement activities during the design phase typically begin by preparing a community awareness plan and may involve activities such as public information meetings or a design public hearing, as explained in the FDOT Design Manual. For projects that have completed a PD&E phase, the design phase public involvement is built upon the public involvement activities conducted during the PD&E phase. Public involvement during construction involves responding to public requests for information regarding construction activities and informing the public about construction activities such as lane closures, median changes, business access impacts, work hours, work zones, detours, temporary access, and grand openings.
Lesson 2, we will describe the planning phase in more detail. The planning process begins when metropolitan planning organizations, FDOT, and other authorities identify transportation needs and projects that meet those needs. The following planning products assist in documenting transportation needs: Long-Range Transportation Plan, or LRTP, Cost-Feasible Plans, Strategic Intermodal System Plans, Transit Development Plans, Local Government Comprehensive Plans, Municipal or Citywide Transportation Master Plans, Corridor Planning Studies, Corridor Master Plans, Needs Plans, and Sub-Area Studies. The planning phase is a collaborative effort that includes several contributors, such as the MPO, county governments, transportation planning organizations, citizens, and FDOT, to name a few. At the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, or MPOs, and Transportation Planning Organizations, or TPOs, project needs are matched and prioritized to available funding for projects in the long-range transportation plans. At the state level, FDOT develops cost-feasible plans for the state highway system and Florida rail system. Priority projects are selected annually from these cost-feasible plans and are presented to the Florida Legislature as FDOT's tentative work program. Projects that are included in the work program and approved may wait for funding for up to 5 years before significant work can proceed. FDOT coordinates with the various MPOs and TPOs and local stakeholders throughout the state to develop a vision for a state's transportation system. This includes establishment of goals, objectives, and policies to sustain and support the growth of the state's population and economy. Additionally, FDOT provides guidance and technical assistance to transit providers for their transit development plans. During the planning phase, the purpose and need for the project is established based on identified transportation problems or deficiencies. Transportation land use, safety, public and agency involvement, and other planning data are the primary source of information used to establish or define the purpose and need of the project and range of alternatives to analyze. Technical studies for a project can be performed within the planning phase to define or refine project parameters and establish the purpose and need for the project. They may also determine funding needs, identify alternatives, including alternative models, and define the concept and scope for the transportation improvements, including general location and the proposed project. The planning studies inform the development of the scope of work for PD&E studies. Alternatives development may begin during the planning phase. Project alternatives developed, including those eliminated from further consideration during the planning phase, may be incorporated directly or by reference into the environmental document, provided certain conditions are met. These conditions are discussed in Section 4.2.2 of Part 1, Chapter 4 of the PD&E Manual.
In Lesson 3, we will discuss the linking planning and environmental review. Please note that during this lesson, NEPA and PD&E are used interchangeably. The linking of planning decisions in the environmental review process, also known as planning and environmental linkages, or PEL, provide a connection between planning level and environment review decisions. Planning decisions in the environmental review process should seamlessly integrate to eliminate duplication of both analysis effort and data gathering to minimize delays in project delivery. The benefit of linking planning decisions and the PD&E study is the ability to reuse data gathered, methodology developed, results obtained, and decisions made during the planning phase to streamline project delivery and reduce duplication of effort. Other benefits include the ability of identifying environmental issues before developing the scope of the PD&E study to focus the scope of the PD&E study to relevant issues. Pursuant to Title 23 of the United States Code, Section 168, Title 23, Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, Section 450.21 and Section 450.318, results in decisions from a system-level corridor sub-area planning study may be used in the NEPA analysis if they meet certain conditions. These decisions include, but are not limited to, 1. Purpose and need for the proposed action. 2. General travel corridor or model choices. 3. Preliminary screening of alternatives. 4. Methodologies for analysis. 5. Basic description of environmental setting. 6. Elimination of unreasonable alternatives. Mitigation efforts. And financial measures necessary to implement the project. Similarly, as codified in Title 23 of the United States Code, or USC, Section 168, the following planning analysis from a planning product for a transportation product may be adopted. 1. Travel demands. 2. Regional development and growth. 3. Local land use and growth management. 4. Population and employment. 5. Natural and built environmental conditions. 6. Environmental resources and environmentally sensitive areas. 7. Potential environmental effects. And 8. Mitigation needs for a proposed product. The relevant agency in the environmental review process may adopt or incorporate by reference decisions from a planning product when the lead federal agency determines that 10 conditions set forth in Title 23 of the USC Section 168 are met. 1. The planning product was developed through a planning process conducted pursuant to applicable federal law. 2. The planning product was developed in consultation with appropriate federal and state agencies and Indian tribes. 3. The planning process included broad multidisciplinary consideration of system-level or corridor-wide transportation needs and potential effects, including the effect on the human and natural environment. 4. Planning process included public notice that the planning products produced in the planning process may be adopted during subsequent environmental review processes in accordance with this section. 5. During environmental review process, the relevant agency has made the planning products available for public review, provided notice of the intent to adopt the product, and considered resulting comments. 6. There's no significant new information or new circumstances that have a reasonable likelihood of affecting the continued validity of the appropriateness of the planning product. 7. The planning product has a rational basis and is based on reliable and reasonably current data and reasonable and scientifically acceptable methodologies. 8. The planning product is documented in sufficient detail to support the decision or the results of the analysis and to meet the requirements for use in the environmental review process. 9. The planning product is appropriate for adoption or incorporation by reference in the use of the environmental review process for the project. And 10, the planning product was approved within the 5-year period ending on the date on which the information is adopted or incorporated by reference. It is important to note that the degree to which information, analysis, or decisions from the planning process can be adopted or incorporated by reference into the NEPA process depends on how well the planning product meets the standards applicable under NEPA and associated implementing regulations. Also, it should be noted that linking planning and NEPA does not mean that the planning product should be prepared to a level comparable to a PD&E study. Pursuant to Titles 23 and 49 USC, transportation plans and programs are exempt from NEPA review. In fact, environmental evaluations that are conducted during the planning phase are not required to address all regulatory requirements that should be addressed by the NEPA analysis. To ensure that the public is provided an opportunity for input and proper disclosure that FDOT may adopt a planning product, the following public notices must be inserted in the planning products that are to be adopted in a subsequent environmental review process. As always, the Office of Environmental Management should be consulted when making these decisions.
In Lesson 4, we briefly discussed the efficient transportation decision-making process, screening activities within the project development process. The efficient transportation decision-making process, or ETDM process, is Florida's process for incorporating environmental considerations into transportation planning to streamline project delivery. The process provides agencies and other stakeholders the opportunity for early input and consideration of the environment in FDOT transportation planning. The types of transportation projects that qualify for screening are listed in the ETDM Manual. A link to the manual can be found on the resources page. Some examples of the types of projects that qualify for ETDM screening include new roadways, projects with additional through lanes to add capacity, and major interchange modifications. The objectives of the ETDM process are: 1. Early identification of issues for project scope development. 2. Early consideration of environmental issues in the planning process. 3. Public and Environmental Technical Advisory Team, or ETAT, member participation. 4. Linkage between planning and PD&E. And 5. Incorporation of appropriate dispute resolution mechanisms during the planning process. These objectives are accomplished through stakeholder involvement, early consideration of environmental effects, integrating processes which previously conducted sequentially, using interactive techniques and innovative technologies. Ideally, the ETDM process consists of the planning screen and the programming screen as shown in this graphic. The planning screen should occur when considering projects for inclusion or prioritization with a cost-feasible plan. The programming screen should occur to support development of the FDOT 5-year work program. The programming screen also should inform the development of a scope of services for the PD&E study. The results of the screening events link the transportation planning phase and the PD&E phase. Each screening event centers on a project review and includes project preparation activities and follow-up tasks occurring before and after the review. This graphic and the process is described in greater detail within Chapter 2 of the ETDM Manual. Intergovernmental coordination is accomplished through the ETDM, or the Environmental Technical Advisory Team, or ETAT, which is assigned to each FDOT district. The ETAT includes representatives from MPOs and TPOs, federal and state agencies, and participating Native American tribes. ETAT members use the Environmental Screening Tool, or EST, to review project information, identify potential project effects, and submit comments to FDOT. This is a web-based Geographic Information System, or GIS, database and mapping tool that provides access to project information and data about natural, physical, cultural, and community resources in the project area. The public also has access to a read-only version of the ETDM website. ETAP members are notified when a project is ready for review. At the same time, the information is published on the ETDM public access site. During the review period, FDOT affords an opportunity for ETAP members and the public to provide input about potential project effects. ETAP members perform multidisciplinary reviews specific to their area of expertise within their jurisdiction. For example, Army Corps of Engineers may focus on impacts to wetlands. These reviews help to evaluate the feasibility of a proposed project, allow for early identification of potential avoidance, minimization, and mitigation opportunities, identify environmental issues that need focused attention during the PD&E phase, and create documentation and analysis in support of the PD&E phase. The programming screen summary report summarizes recommendations and results from ETAT reviews. FDOT uses the report to advance or focus analysis and studies conducted prior to the PD&E phase, develop the scope of services for the PD&E study, and assist in determining the appropriate class of action for the project. The ETDM Programming Screen Summary Report also contains documentation of project alternatives developed as part of the planning and project screening events.
This conference will now be recorded.
In this lesson, we'll go over the alternative corridor evaluation process. FDOT uses the alternative corridor evaluation, or ACE process, to identify, evaluate, and eliminate alternatives on qualifying projects before the PD&E phase. The decisions made during ACE can be used to refine the project purpose and need, define the project area, define general travel modes and corridors, define general environmental setting for a project, identify preliminary environmental impacts and environmental mitigation, develop and evaluate a range of alternatives to be refined in detail during the PD&E study, and document elimination of unreasonable alternatives. ACE is typically performed as part of the ETDM screening efforts that precede the PD&E phase. The district should use the ACE process to support potential environmental impact statement and certain environmental assessment projects. The ACE process may also be used to eliminate corridors that are part of a state environmental impact report when new alignments are under consideration. Projects that qualify for the ACE process include new alignments, which includes new roadways, new roadway connections or extensions, major realignments, major bypasses, truck bypasses, city and town bypasses, and other alignments based on consultation with OEM. A level of detail in an alternative corridor evaluation is higher than a typical planning product, but less than a PD&E study. The ACE process identifies and evaluates corridor alternatives using the methodology agreed upon by the project stakeholders, which is documented in the methodology memorandum. The results of the ACE process are documented in the Alternative Corridor Evaluation Report, or ACER. The ACE process includes the following 4 basic steps. Step 1, define initial corridors and decide to advance the project. Step 2, develop methodology memorandum, which would identify project goals, initial corridors, and the methods for evaluation. Step 3, conduct the study and refine corridors based on the methodology memorandum. Step 4, prepare the alternative corridor evaluation report with results and corridors recommended for further study. Based on initial data collection effort, the district should identify and define a reasonable range of initial alternatives, including alternative modes that would address the project's purpose and need. The district should also consider corridor alternatives from previously completed planning activities such as planning level corridor, sub-area and feasibility studies, multimodal corridor plans, vision plans, master plans that might inform the ACE process. If no corridor alternatives were previously developed, the district should identify initial corridors within the study area before preparing of the methodology. Initial corridors can range from a swath of broad corridors to a narrower alignments. As part of the initial corridor definition, consideration should be given to the environment, stakeholder comments, and any conditions that may prevent development of corridors. When evaluating major urban corridors, the district must consider the need for public transportation systems, facilities and services, and alternative corridors that will address multimodal transportation needs consistent with the major urban corridor study policies. This policy is available on FDOT's Policy and Process Management Unit's website. The link to this site can be found under the Resources page. Such consideration can include analysis for reasonable corridors based on the presence of alternative transportation modes and the feasibility of developing an interconnected multimodal transportation system. Multimodal options that must be considered include, but are not limited to, fixed guideway facilities and expanded bus service with supporting facilities. The district project manager should then decide whether to advance the evaluation. Once the decision has been made to advance the project, the district defines the goals for the ACE process, such as performing an action plan corridor study or determining reasonable alternatives for the PD&E study. A methodology memorandum, or MM, describes the goals of the evaluation, identifies alternative corridors, describes the methods for developing, evaluating, and screening alternative corridors, describes the process for public involvement, and establishes criteria from the basis of decision-making. The methodology and memorandum components should include background information, describe the goals and objectives of the ACE, describe the methods that will be used to analyze the alternatives and make decisions, include a brief description of stakeholder involvement. The evaluation criteria may include purpose and need evaluation, engineering feasibility, construction cost, and avoidance of potential environmental impacts, consistency with or impact on adjacent plans, and other unique issues specific to the study area. The district project manager first coordinates with OEM when developing the methodology memorandum. Subsequently, the methodology memorandum is uploaded into the EST so that the ETAC can review and comment. After the methodology memorandum has been reviewed by the ETAC, the district revises the methodology memorandum as necessary to address any comments received before sending the document to OEM for review. In certain situations, the methodology memorandum may need to be reviewed by the project stakeholders more than once. This may take place when one or more of the following apply. 1, there is a change in project termini, such as it is expanded. 2, there's a change in the purpose and need. 3, there's a change in the project concepts, such that a number of lanes or adding interchanges. 4, there is a change in supporting data that may affect the methodology and any resulting decisions made from it, such as population changes, economic changes, land use changes, or others. 5, when stakeholder input results in significant revisions to the methodology. Once OEM accepts the methodology, the FDOT ETDM coordinator republishes the preliminary programming screen summary report and the approved methodology memorandum to document concurrence. See Part 1, Chapter 4 of the PD&E Manual for an outline of the methodology memorandum. The district evaluates corridors using initial data and the criteria established and agreed upon in the methodology memorandum. In studying the alternatives and considering input from the ETAT and other project stakeholders, the district may refine corridors, eliminate corridors, or develop additional corridors to avoid potential environmental effects. The refinement of corridors to avoid potential environmental effects also considers the corridor vision, the purpose and need, public input, and engineering and economic feasibility. Alternative corridors that do not meet the purpose and need are eliminated from further study through the ACE process and are documented in the Alternative Corridor Evaluation Report, or ACER. The alternative corridors that meet the purpose and need are developed to a conceptual planning level sufficient to evaluate their benefits and impacts relative to the purpose and need of the project. The Alternative Corridor Evaluation Report documents the alternative corridor analysis and the alternatives that were eliminated from further study or otherwise, or carried forward into the PD&E study. Documentation regarding the elimination of alternatives in the Alternative Corridor Evaluation Report must be included in the project file for the NEPA process. It is critical that properly document the methodology, analysis, public and agency involvement, and resulting planning decisions in the ACER to ensure that these analyses meet the requirements for use in the NEPA process. The ACER must document assumptions supporting planning analysis, such as travel demand forecast year, forecast methodology and its rationale, and future year data. Additionally, the ACER should document policy assumptions related to land use, socioeconomic factors, transportation costs, and the transportation network that were used to develop and evaluate alternatives. The ACER should also document any unresolved project issues with the public, stakeholders, or agencies, and how they will be addressed in the subsequent phases of the project. When completed, OEM reviews the ACER. It is also uploaded into the environmental screening tool for input from the ETAT. The adoption and use of the ACE decisions in the NEPA process is subject to determination by OEM.
In Lesson 6, we will discuss some of the key components to scoping a PD&E study. Project scoping is a project development activity that identifies and considers various project-related issues which may affect cost and schedule, determines work activities to be performed for the project, and develops or refines key project parameters and requirements sufficient to define the project. The project scoping process builds on the SWOT process. Project scoping of a PD&E study starts towards the end of the planning process as the project transitions to the PD&E phase. Project scoping helps to focus specific project activities toward addressing issues that may have a potential to impact the project delivery. Project scoping also helps to identify actions needed during the PD&E phase to avoid, minimize, or mitigate a project's potential impacts. Additionally, project scoping provides the foundation to begin a PD&E study. The PD&E scope of services documents the project parameters and the level of engineering and environmental analysis required to develop the project that will meet the purpose and need. The level of engineering and environmental analysis is commensurate with the project type and its context, and the significance of potential project impacts. The PD&E project manager is responsible for scoping the PD&E study. The statewide acceleration and transformation process, or SWAT process, acts as a bridge between planning, PD&E, and design. It is a framework that sets the project up during the planning phase prior to PD&E. The SWAT process is a project management approach that streamlines FDOT's project delivery process through early coordination and communication among the different functional offices within the FDOT district when identifying projects for funding and scoping in the planning process. All state and federally funded projects are evaluated through the SWOT process to determine project parameters for funding, scope of work, programming, and scheduling. The SWOT process promotes and enhances communication and collaboration with district offices when projects are evaluated for inclusion in the tentative work program. The districts can adopt the SWOT process to their planning, programming, and project scoping processes. See the FDOT SWOT training workbook for more guidance. This workbook is available on the OEM SWOT information webpage. Each district has an established SWOT team composed of cross-functional, multidisciplinary staff experienced in project delivery. SWOT team members are experts who are involved at key milestones during project planning prior to development of the PD&E scope of services to ensure that project decisions get broad input and early support. Members of the SWOT team typically include representatives from work program, production, scheduling, intermodal system development planning, design, right-of-way, traffic operations, and environmental management. Other staff from relevant district functional offices may be invited to participate in SWOT team meetings. The districts may combine the SWOT team meetings with other related meetings such as scope team meeting, priority projects programming meeting, or project planning meeting that are used to evaluate candidate projects in the district. The SWOT process framework consists of 3 milestone meetings: the planning meeting, strategy meeting, and kickoff meetings. The purpose of these meetings is to plan and review the preliminary scope, schedule, and funding of the projects. This image represents the SWOT process graphically from project selection in the FDOT 5-year work program up to the beginning of the design phase. On the bottom of this graphic are the 3 major milestones meetings in the SWOT process in relation to the development of the project. Typically, when a new project is added to the FDOT 5-year work program for a PD&E phase, it is programmed in the new 5th year. The SWOT process engages and continues project development in those waiting years before the start of the PD&E phase. The first meeting is the annual SWOT planning meeting. This meeting is used to review potential PD&E projects that will be included in the tentative work program. The outcome of the SWOT planning meeting is a list of funding recommendations for each candidate project, whether state or federal funding, anticipated class of action assigned to each project, and a list of projects to be screened through the ETDM process. The next meeting is the SWOT strategy meeting. The SWOT team should hold a strategy meeting annually for each PD&E project identified in the tentative work program to strategically define or refine the scope of work, review funding, create a baseline schedule, which includes pre-PD&E activities and project delivery milestones, and confirm advertisement date and initial construction cost estimate are realistic. The last meeting is the SWOT kickoff meeting. Each project that has a PD&E phase should hold a SWOT kickoff meeting at least 1 year before the start of the PD&E study. Districts have a flexibility of adopting or combining the SWOT kickoff meeting with existing district scope meetings, interdisciplinary team meetings. The purpose of the kickoff meeting is to evaluate the preliminary project scope by understanding the project objectives and purpose and need, discussing project limits, reviewing context classification, reviewing project planning activities such as ETDM, programming screen, and feasibility studies, and more. Additional guidance is included in the FDOT SWOT training workbook. To streamline development of PD&E schedules, FDOT has developed project schedule templates for PD&E studies by class of action. The PD&E schedule templates can be accessed from OEM's project managed PMS codes and schedule template webpage. A link to this site is provided on the resources page. The templates can be customized to meet the complexity and context of the project. The schedule templates provide a task coding structure that uses FDOT's production schedule and management, or PSM codes. Prior to the PD&E advertisement, the PD&E project manager should work with the district program management office to create a schedule that uses PSM codes. The project manager should develop a project schedule using information discussed in the SWOT kickoff meeting and convey project schedule to the district program management office scheduler. The scheduler should enter identified schedule milestones in the PSM with corresponding codes prior to the advertisement for consultant acquisition. If the consultant is under contract for the project manager should communicate the expectation of the project schedule to ensure the consultant meets the scheduled demands. Engineering activities for a PD&E study are performed to a level of detail to analyze and compare effects of the project alternatives on the social, natural, cultural, and physical environment. The level of design detail required for PD&E study is project-specific and should be sufficient to establish preliminary geometry for the preferred alternative. Depending on the context and schedule of the project being studied under the NEPA process, PD&E and design can begin concurrently, provided that the preliminary design activities comply with Title 23 CFR Part 771 and Title 40 of the CFR subsections 1500 through 1508. Essentially, the preliminary design activities must not limit the choice of reasonable alternatives. Projects that follow the state process have more flexibility in advancing design phase activities concurrent with the PD&E design. FHWA Order 6640.1A, Policy on Permissible Project-Related Activities During the NEPA Process, clarifies the level of design detail allowed in PD&E studies. To utilize the flexibility provided in the FHWA directive during PD&E, districts may perform preliminary design activities prior to a NEPA decision, regardless of the project delivery method that is used. However, final design activities may not be advanced until a NEPA decision has been issued. A list of preliminary design and final design activities is included in the Chapter 301 of the Florida Design Manual. Other activities necessary to establish the final design parameters for a project may proceed as preliminary design so long as those activities do not materially affect the objective consideration of alternatives in the NEPA process or have adverse environmental impacts. Overall, preliminary design activities for a project can commence during the PD&E process by overlapping PD&E and design phases or procuring the two phases concurrently. This is one of the outcomes of the SWOT process. There are three options for dual procurement of PD&E and design phases that the district may consider. These options are: 1 contract for both PD&E and design funded together, 2, 1 contract for PD&E with an option for design, and 3, 2 overlapping contracts procured simultaneously or separately. For more information on permissible projects-related activities during NEPA and overlapping PD&E and design phases, see Part 1, Chapter 4 of the PD&E Manual. The project manager must review the programming screen summary report before advancing the project to PD&E. The report helps the project manager to become familiar with the environmental or social resources that may be impacted by the project. The report also includes project needs and objectives, as well as level of analysis and documentation required to accomplish project objectives. When technical studies and surveys are completed prior to PD&E, the project manager must review the reports and adjust the scope of work by eliminating the activities or tasks that were previously completed and are still current or valid. Additionally, the project manager should explore opportunities to adopt or incorporate by reference planning analysis, such as interchange access request studies, traffic models, corridor studies, multimodal corridor studies, transit alternative analysis, bicycle plans, feasibility studies, and freight corridor studies when applicable. Guidance on using planning products in the PD&E study is provided in Part 1, Chapter 4 of the PD&E Manual. The project manager must consult with the district environmental office for input regarding project activities and/or impacts. The project manager must work in concert with an interdisciplinary project team, largely composed of members from the district SWAT team, and use recommendations from the SWAT kickoff meeting. The project manager must use the PD&E study standard scope of services development tool to prepare the scope of services for the project. The project manager must have a statewide environmental project tracker or SWEP account to access the scope of services development tool. The statewide environmental project tracker or SWEP is used to develop the PD&E scope of services. The scope development tool within SWEP is interactive and allows for flexibility with scope development. The Office of Environmental Management has developed additional guidance on how to prepare the scope of services. It includes instructions for developing the scope of services, staff hour estimation guidelines, and forms for estimating the fee of the PD&E study, and a copy of the standard scope of services. This guidance is provided on the OEM website. A link can be found on the resources page. The procurement process for alternative project delivery methods such as design, build, and contract administration processes follow standard FDOT practices as specified in the design, build, procurement, and administration procedure. Districts are responsible for conducting the design, build, procurement, and contract administration processes for projects within their jurisdiction. For design, build projects and other projects that follow the alternative delivery methods, FDOT ensures that the requirements set by Title 23 CFR Part 636 are met, which include those imposed to protect the objectivity and integrity of the NEPA process. The design, build, procurement, and administration procedure provides flexibility by allowing projects to be advertised and selected while the NEPA process is being concluded. This procedure can be found on FDOT's Policy and Process Management Unit's website. Each project must have a Project Management Plan, or PMP, also called the Project Work Plan. The purpose of the PMP is to promote the efficient, organized, and timely completion of work product according to schedule, budget, and contract requirements. The PMP details the project scope, defines the project delivery, and establishes project schedule, budget, resource allocation, communication plan, and the management methods used by the project team to deliver the project. Pursuant to Title 23 U.S.C. Section 106, major projects are required to have an FHWA-approved PMP and annual financial plan, including a phasing plan when applicable. It is generally recommended that the draft PMP be submitted to FHWA Florida Division Office at least 60 days prior to OEM approval of the NEPA document for major projects. The financial plan for a major project is coordinated by the Project Finance Office in the Office of the Comptroller and must be based on detailed estimates of project cost and the program funding for the project. The project manager is responsible for the quality control of the environmental document and supporting technical studies. To reach quality objectives, Each project must establish and follow quality assurance or QA and quality control or QC protocols. All work associated with the PD&E study must adhere to a project-specific QC plan, which ensures that project deliverables conform to applicable laws, regulation, and FDOT procedures. FDOT's Project Management Handbook has a chapter on quality assurance and quality control procedure. Additionally, OEM has prepared a QC plan template and associated checklist for PD&E studies. The template can be downloaded from the OEM website. Project risk management is the systematic process of identifying, analyzing, planning for, responding to, and monitoring project risk. It involves processes, tools, and techniques that help the project manager minimize the probability and consequences of adverse events by developing and following a risk management plan, which should identify the risks that need to be managed and the selected risk response strategy for each. Risk management is the most effective when performed early in the life of a project and assessed continuously throughout the project, during ETDM screening events and SWOT kickoff meetings. When a formal risk analysis is performed for the project, its outcome is documented in a risk register. Since risk management and analysis is an ongoing process throughout the life of the project managers must continuously monitor and control and identify and analyze new risks for the projects. This can be achieved by adding project risk to the agenda for project meetings. For additional information, see FDOT's Project Management Handbook, Part 1, Chapter 19, Risk Management. Any proposal to change the access to a limited access facility, such as the interstate system, can potentially have an adverse impact on the ability to effectively and safely accommodate travel demand in a corridor. To ensure access decisions are properly administered, FDOT and FHWA adopted policies and requirements regarding interchange access requests and approvals on limited access facilities. The approval of an interchange access request, or IAR, on interstate highways is a two-part process. The first part is the determination of safety, operational, and engineering, or SONE, acceptability of the request by satisfying and documenting the requirements of FHWA's policy points on access to the interstate system and FDOT's procedure for new or modified interchange. The first part may proceed or occur concurrently with the PD&E study. The second part is the approval of the environmental document and completion of the PD&E study. The final approval of the IAR by FHWA cannot precede the completion of the NEPA document. The IAR process is discussed in detail in the Interchange Access Request User's Guide. A link to this can be found on the resource page. This process map shows the interchange access request two main parts. FHWA's policy on access to the interstate system focuses on the technical feasibility of access request proposals in support of the FHWA's determination of SONE acceptability. To streamline project reviews, the policy requires environmental impacts evaluation and planning considerations of IAR proposals be addressed through the NEPA review process. FDOT will request final approval of IAR from FHWA only after the location and design concept approval, or LDCA, for the access proposal is granted by OEM, and verification that LDCA and SONE concepts are the same.
This conference will now be recorded.
In Lesson 7, we'll discuss the PD&E phase and the environmental documentation. The PD&E phase builds on the outcome of the ETD, the SWOT team meetings, prior planning studies, and ACE as applicable to further refine the project's purpose and need. The PD&E phase may also identify project alternatives that satisfy the purpose and need for the project. Environmental analysis is performed during the ETDM or the PD&E phase, evaluate the project's effects on social, cultural, natural, and physical resources. Throughout the PD&E process, interagency coordination is conducted to identify project impacts, permitting requirements, project commitments, and funding sources. Commitments identified during the PD&E process can include requirements for future coordination, avoidance and minimization, and mitigation of unavoidable impacts to resources. Please note that this lesson does not discuss projects that are Type 1 CEs or non-major state actions, since these projects do not have a PD&E phase. Environmental evaluations for these projects are performed during the design phase. Under NEPA assignment program, FHWA assigned and FDOT assumed environmental review of projects environmental review responsibilities. Therefore, FDOT is a lead agency for highway projects with approval authority resting in the Office of Environmental Management. This applies to highway projects whose source of federal funding comes from FHWA or which constitute a federal action through FHWA. NEPA assignment has some of the following features. Allows for direct consultation with federal regulatory agencies. It consolidates all NEPA reviews under FDOT, which eliminate one layer of governmental review, and FDOT has decision-making authority with NEPA assignment. For more information, NEPA assignment training has been provided on OEM's training program website. The class of action for federal programs, federal projects may have been determined during the ETDM programming screen. However, a class of action determination is not mandatory prior to advancing a project into the PD&E phase. If the class of action is known, the project may proceed as a Type 2 categorical exclusion, environmental assessment, or an environmental impact statement. If the project is state funded, it may proceed as a state environmental impact report. Projects requiring a federal action or that use federal aid funds must meet planning consistency requirements outlined in Title 23 CFR Part 450 prior to submittal for OEM for location and design concept acceptance or LDCA. The Type 2 categorical exclusion project with no known significant impacts, but which requires documentation of analysis and relevant issues or public involvement. The document of record for the LDCA is the signed Type 2 categorical exclusion determination form, which is prepared and swept. The technical reports or documents prepared to support them must be uploaded into the project file and swept and summarized or referenced in the form. A public hearing is typically required for Type 2 CEs. OEM approval is required for these type of projects. The processing and documentation for Type 2 CEs is outlined in Part 1, Chapter 5 of the PD&E Manual. Additional training on Type 2 CEs is available in the computer-based NEPA introductory course Categorical Exclusions. An environmental assessment, or EA, is the class of action assigned to a project where the significance of the environmental impacts is unknown. Depending on the significance of impacts, an EA will result in a finding of no significant impact, or FONSI, where the analysis of the technical studies indicates that no significant environmental impact will result from the proposed project. The LDCA is granted with approval of the FONSI. If significant environmental impacts result from the action, then the project is elevated to an environmental impact statement, or EIS. A public hearing is required for all EAs. OEM approval is also required for these types of projects. The processing and documentation for EAs is outlined in Part 1, Chapter 6 of the PD&E Manual. Additional training on EAs is available in the computer-based NEPA introductory course, Environmental Assessment. Part 1, Chapter 7 provides more information on FONSIs. An environmental impact statement, or EIS, is the class of action that is assigned to projects that have been determined to have a significant environmental impact. Prior to initiation of the project, a notice of intent is submitted to inform the general public and stakeholders that an EIS is being prepared for the proposed project. A public hearing is required for these projects. A draft EIS final EIS and record of decision, or ROD, are approved by OEM. Once a ROD is approved, the LDCA is received. The processing and documentation for environmental impact statements is outlined in Part 1, Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 of the PD&E Manual. Additional training on EISs is available in the computer-based NEPA introductory course, Environmental Impact Statement Overview, and the Draft Environmental Impact Statement. State Environmental Impacts Reports, or SEERs, are state-funded projects that require a PD&E study. Generally, if a state-funded project qualifies for ETDM screening, a SEER is required. These projects do not require a NEPA document. However, a SEER is comparable to an environmental document that may be used by other federal permitting agencies that must follow NEPA if a federal permit is required. The district approves these projects rather than OEM. When a local agency or other entity is the lead agency, a Project Environmental Impact Report, or PEIR, may be prepared. PEIRs are used by non-FDOT entities when state funds are used, or the project lies on a strategic intermodal system, state highway system, facility, or a project advances through other unique funding mechanisms such as a state infrastructure bank loan. Ultimately, the district should work with the local agency or private entity to determine whether a PEIR or a SEER is required. Processing and documentation for state, local, and private. Additional training on these types of projects is available in the computer-based NEPA introductory course, State, Local, and Privately Funded Projects and Delivery. Environmental technical studies are performed and the results documented in accordance with the appropriate chapters in Part 2 of the PD&E Manual. Environmental technical studies may include water quality impact evaluation, natural resource evaluation, noise study, air quality, contamination screening evaluation, conceptual state relocation, Section 4F evaluation, cultural resource assessment survey, sociocultural effects evaluation, and drainage and floodplains evaluation. Reports documenting these studies are prepared in response to the relevant environmental issues and resources. Technical reports are sent to OEM for review prior to submitting to appropriate agencies for coordination and consultation. Documentation for a PD&E study typically includes the environmental document, technical reports, data, memorandum, maps, meeting summaries, and input from the public and resource agencies. A PD&E project manager is responsible for collecting, maintaining, and filing documentation for a PD&E study in the project file. All project documents are filed and stored in accordance with FDOT records management procedures utilizing the process outlined in Part 1, Chapter 15 of the PD&E Manual. This procedure is available on FDOT's Policy and Process Unit Management Unit's website. A list of reports and design information to include in the project file is provided in Part 1, Chapter 4 of the PD&E Manual.
In Lesson 8, we briefly discussed the Emergency Relief Program. When the President of the United States signs an emergency declaration, the cost of debris removal from federal aid roads will be reimbursable from Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, not FHWA. All other damage will be reimbursable from FHWA. Federal aid roads in Florida are all roadway except those classified as local roads or rural minor collectors. Each damaged site with an estimated cost of repair exceeding $5,000 will be eligible for FHWA reimbursement under the Emergency Relief Program. Each damaged location will require documentation on FHWA Form 1547, Detailed Damage Inspection Report, or DDIR. There are two types of repairs under the Emergency Relief Program: emergency repairs and permanent repairs. Emergency repairs are those performed to restore essential traffic, to minimize the extent of damage, or to protect the remaining facilities. Repairs to that go beyond these three objectives are permanent repairs. Emergency repairs are eligible for 100% federal share if they are made during or right after a disaster within 180 days. Emergency repairs do not need an approved federal authorization in place prior to the work being done. The federal authorization can be processed after the repair work is completed. Type 1 CE documentation for emergency repairs is completed pursuant to Title 23 USC Section 125. Permanent repairs must have an approved federal authorization in place before any repair work is done to maintain eligibility for emergency relief federal funding. The District Federal Aid Coordinator should be contacted for additional information on the prerequisites needed to obtain an approved federal authorization. Additional information on the Emergency Relief Program, including FHWA's Emergency Relief Manual, can be found at FHWA's Emergency Relief Program website. In cases where emergency actions may affect federally listed species and/or critical habitat, emergency consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or National Marine Fisheries Service is required by Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act. Also, see Part 2, Chapter 16 of the PD&E Manual for guidance on emergency consultation with these agencies. See Part 2, Chapter 8 of the PD&E Manual for guidelines on complying with Section 106, Chapter 267, Florida statutes, and Section 4F, where emergency action may affect historic and Section 4F resources. We have now completed the NEPA introductory course. Thank you.